Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for staying. My name is Jo Duncombe, and I'm a film programmer at the British Council. And I'm also here representing tonight for Bird's Eye View, which is an organisation that exists to support and champion brilliant films by brilliant women. So do check them out on their website. And speaking of brilliant films by brilliant women, I would like to welcome to the stage the director, Hikaru Toda, and the producer, Elham Shakarafar. Please give them a very big round of applause. Wow, thank you both so much for sharing such wonderful stories and letting us have the company of some very brilliant people this evening. Hikaru, can we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to meet Fumi and Kazu and how you came to tell this particular story?
So I met them back in 2012, beginning of 2013, end of 2012, when I was still living in London. And I went to Osaka for the first time to work on another project that I was helping with. And yeah, they just came across like this very open, very warm, and very accepting of each other and their own weaknesses. And I just fell in love with them as people and as a couple. And I was really jealous that they found each other and they're working so well together. And so I got really curious about their work as lawyers as well, because I felt like that was another way of looking into the more intimate, the personal side of Japan that we don't often get to see or get access to. And in particular in the West, it's not really portrayed. I questioned the way Japan was being portrayed, so I really wanted to look at more of the human side. And because so many people come to them for help with the most intimate problems and issues that they're dealing with in the day-to-day, so I felt like they could be a really interesting entry point and like a window into the more invisible part of Japan.
And Elham, how did you come to be attached to this project and to work with Hikaru?
So Hikaru and I knew each other from university. And I'd been producing for a couple of years when she first met Fumi and Kazu. And I suppose exactly what she was saying, that I'd never seen, or I was guessing, understanding that making films that challenge a dominant narrative are really tricky, and that's probably why there are so few of them, that I hadn't really heard a story from Japan like this, and it didn't conform to these kind of ideas of Japan as it's portrayed outside of Japan, so a very kind of orderly country or very polite country or very kind of like eccentric. And this was actually just in between all of that and just about people. And so that's basically where it started. And it's been quite a long journey since then. Quite interesting in terms of, well, we were just talking about this kind of, there was an incredible amount of supposed support at the beginning which never really materialized, and so that really spoke to this idea of how exciting the film seemed to be in people's minds, but actually when we didn't want to tell that superficial story, how quickly everything kind of, people seemed to back away. So it was a challenging one, but what's been really amazing is to see the response to the finished film, which seems to really challenge perceptions and it's had an incredible run in Japan. So it was released in September and it's still screening in cinemas, so that's about 5 months, 30 cities around the country, and that's incredible.
That's amazing. And has the response in Japan been universally praise, or has there been some criticism as well, or has it generally just been warmly received?
I think for people who decide to go see films like this, it's been it's been positive. It's been very well received, and for those who don't go to films like this, I guess I don't know, I can't say, but but yeah, no, we've had very positive reviews. Yeah.
And also it's been taken on as an educational resource, so it's also endorsed by the government, I guess, in that way, and which is interesting as well, but brilliant as well.
Hikaru, the relationship the relationship between Fumi and Kazu is presented so tenderly. You get really close and really personal with both of them. How did that work? I know you worked with Jason Brooks, your DOP, to kind of establish a really good rapport with them both, but what was your kind of journey into building that relationship where you could achieve those really personal moments?
Yeah, I think, well, I knew them for 2 years before, almost 2 years before starting to shoot with them for this film, and I think that helped. So we knew each other as people first before we became director and subject, or, you know, the crew and subject. So that was good. And when Jason got involved, I think he's very nice, just as people, like as a person. He's very tall, so if you go to Japan, and he really stands out, but actually he's like a, you know, gentle giant and very sweet, and I think they're very good at judgments of character, these guys, and they don't share the same language, but they just formed a real friendship that wasn't based on language or, you know, understanding verbally, but just having that air around them, and it was really warm, and they're very, very warm people. So whatever we shot was out of their generosity to share with us what they wanted to share with us, and I think largely it was very helpful to have someone like Jason there who was very warm himself. And yeah, it's, you know, I think documentaries are made through relationships. So I think that relationship is directly what you see on the film.
Throughout the film, the phrase reading the air comes up again and again and again. It seems to be quite pervasive. You are obviously working not only with Fumi and Kazu, but with their multiple clients who have very different stories, very different perspectives on the world. How, if at all, did that spirit of reading the air affect your process in terms of making the film?
Yeah, so I can't read air, or neither can Rokudenashiko or Jason. So it actually helped in a way, because we could kind of bypass that expectation of just understanding this, you know, silent social rules that we were, you know, breaking left, right, and center without really knowing what we're doing. So that really actually benefited us in terms of gaining access, and we were not, you know, expected to fulfill those roles that everybody else in Japan is kind of expected to follow. So yeah, we played it to our advantage, really.
Maybe just to add to that, because it wasn't like if this was a really reckless way of making a film. But just as an example, we made a very short film for the national broadcaster NHK, and so I'm the film's producer and Hikaru is the Japanese director, and there was this constant attempt to cut me out of the conversation. It was more difficult to talk to me because I speak only in English. But actually it was helpful for us that I only spoke English, because it meant that I didn't have to always politely agree with everything. And but there were very important things for us, like, you know, the contracts we had to sign weren't in our favor, and I could argue them in a way that was important for this production, which we wouldn't have been able to do if we were having to go with the accepted social kind of etiquettes and codes. And so I could do that because I was slightly outside of them. I wasn't expected to understand, but at the end of the day, these films can't be made without, you know, trying to find a way that's maybe slightly different. And yeah.
And it was really funny when I finally came to Japan and met the team involved, who were involved in negotiating with NHK, and she was like, "You're so little and nice. I thought you were like this big, like, imposing, scary monster," because she was being very straightforward and very, you know, just doing her job, like negotiating for the team. So yeah.
And the cases that Fumi and Kazu are dealing with, obviously the ones we see on screen, they're all these incredible characters who are fighting against conformity in so many ways. But I imagine they have other cases who aren't necessarily within that space, or feel able to occupy a kind of non-conformist space. How, I mean, you guys must have become so versed in Japanese law whilst making the film.
Yeah, it was really difficult to understand what was going on for a long time. I didn't understand what they were saying for a long time, and way we shoot is very observationally, and we just let them get on with their work, and we're just kind of trying to be invisible as much as possible and just film as things are happening. So it was very difficult, and a lot of the things became clearer in the edit, and I was like, oh, that's what they're talking about. Yeah, it was hard.
Let's talk about Miss Vagina, because what an amazing character she is. What an incredibly brave soul that we've just experienced on screen, but she's obviously continuing to make art. Elton, this is a question for you. It felt quite absurd to see the idea of the vagina being presented as something obscene, but actually you've come up against similar sort of censorship releasing the film elsewhere.
Yeah, so you will have noticed that just before the film there was a 15 certificate for strong sex references, right? Yeah. Which, as you would have seen in the film, there is no sex in the film and there's no nudity in the film. So the idea that Rokudenashiko's challenge or fight in Japan is surprising, and that was actually news that went all around the world because of how crazy it was, is replicated here. And this film has been, the British Board of Film Classification has decided that we can only show it to people over the age of 15, presumably because of her artwork.
Vagina.
Like the vagina up there.
It's very frightening.
So yeah, we've tried to discuss this with them, but it shows that actually there's a level of censorship in every country, and there's certainly a level of censorship here, but also there's obviously a different way of engaging with women, and a question of anatomy, as she says herself. It's something we're also dealing with here.
In the closing moments of the film, we see that Rokudenashiko has moved to Ireland. How? Why? She doing?
So when she was first arrested, she was being sued for obscenity by the police. So she basically had crowdfunded to make this boat shaped like her vagina, which to escape Japan and its patriarchal systems. And one of the crowdfunding rewards was 3D data, so that people could make their own boats as well, and that was what was considered obscene. So she was supported by a huge number of people on social media, and there was a fund set up so that it could support her legal fees. And people from all over the world, it was covered very widely, but people from all over the world got in touch with her, and one of them was someone from Ireland who she began speaking to and developed into a relationship, and he came to Japan and they fell in love, and Hikaru filmed their wedding.
Oh, wow. I couldn't film it, I went there.
Oh no, but you photographed their wedding.
I photographed, yeah, I was invited to their wedding.
You invited to photograph?
As a guest.
Okay, I've seen lots of photographs of the wedding. Yes, he happens to be a singer who's the lead singer of the Waterboys. Some of you might know. Mike Scott. And actually his new album has a song for Rokudenashiko, and actually a song for the lead lawyer in the case, which is Yamaben, which is
really catchy song.
I mean, this is dating success, right?
I mean, it's like reality is. Yeah, she credits the police as the international dating agency.
Amazing.
But yeah, reality is often more interesting than fiction, right?
Right, I think we've got time for some questions, responses, thoughts from the audience. We've got a roving mic, so we'll go over here first.
Thank you very much. My name's Duncan Bartlett. I write a blog called Japan Story. So many things in the film, but I just wanted to pick up on one of the political points there. There was a discussion when the lawyers were going into a university to discuss the Japanese constitution and what it said about the nature of marriage. And one of the questions, there was an argument, wasn't there, with somebody who had attended the lecture as to whether the constitution ruled out gay marriage. That's obviously a debate that goes on in Japan because the constitution makes reference to marriage between men and women.
Both
What
sexes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What was the view of the lawyers on that? Did they feel that there should be a change into the constitution, or did they feel that gay marriage could be recognised without constitutional change?
So that was a scene which was like constitutional cafe that Kazu attended as a lecturer. Their view is that the Japanese constitution states that marriages should be consented between both sexes, and it doesn't specifically say men or women. So they think without changing the constitution, it can mean both sexes, meaning men and men, or women and women. That's could also be part of the interpretation. But more importantly, and it's also in the film, within the same constitution, Article 13, it says that we have, everyone as individuals have the right to pursue happiness, and it doesn't say, why should same-sex people be excluded from that? So it's a contradiction, and they recognize that the Constitution was written at a time when there weren't any discussions about same-sex relationships. So we should also look at that in terms of how take that into consideration when we interpret the Constitution. But yeah, they don't, the present Constitution of Japan doesn't prohibit same-sex marriage, is their interpretation. An interpretation of very prominent constitutional academics across Japan as well.
Who have we got next? There must be another thought. Here we go.
I noticed how when it came to talking about taboo subjects, quite often in Japanese, English loanwords will be used. So stuff like DV for domestic violence, single mother, for example. Do you feel like that's kind of a method of distancing those things from Japan in a way, or is it just kind of a linguistic quirk?
So you're asking whether the language, why we use like foreign terms to talk about. I think it shows that there's not much discussions that happens in Japan, and therefore we need to import these terms. Like LGBT is one of the terms that have been imported in the last 2 years to describe the minorities that we have already, to give them a name so they can claim existence and say like, hey, we exist, instead of before there was no terminology, only very derogatory terms. So it's a way to import an opportunity to discuss, which doesn't really happen in Japan at all about anything really, especially taboo subjects, because they're supposed to be not talked about. So I think it's a good thing that we import words like that, and it makes it more accessible for people, because Japanese words tend to be very heavy. Like, it can be very technical as well. So I think it makes it more accessible for the general public, to make it less about like experts, like the legal language. One of the reasons I have such a problem with legal language is it's so heavy, like it's so technical. And I think imported words make it more accessible.
Another question at the back here.
I'm Japanese.
Can you just wait for the microphone? Thank you.
My 1 second. Voice is not good enough. I'm Japanese, living in London for many years. But what I wondered is that movement, or LGBT in Japan, will develop into what is now in England. In England, it has developed enormously recent years. Will it happen in Japan? Do they get the same right and benefit as those counterpart in England?
No.
Then it's meaningless. To me, it is meaningless.
What's meaningless?
They're married, but no benefit as the ordinary manner.
Yeah, so I think the progress is happening very slowly in Japan. I think it's pretty. I think we're like 30 years behind in terms of things that happened in Europe with in terms of legal protections and legal recognitions.
Yeah, that's what I'm most interested in.
Yes.
Is it really good That's what I want to know.
Yeah, and I think changes happen in different stages, and one is through social awareness, which is why the term becoming more and more used to have a place to discuss issues like this is a good thing, yet it's not necessarily yet reflected in improvements in the law. So we don't have same-sex marriage, and we don't have any kind of legal protections for same-sex people in Japan yet.
Have we got... Okay. Just quick, because I'm sure there are others with questions too.
Yeah. I'm pessimistic about this because it's unthinkable for Japanese government to talk about sexual matters in the parliament. To me,
I don't think it's to do with sexual matters. I think it's about recognizing their population and the types of people that they are supposed to represent. So it's not about, I don't think it's matters of sex. It's about recognizing minorities and recognizing that everybody should be given the same rights. So, and yes, you're right, it's very challenging. And the lawyers are also hopeful that they might be recognized at some point, but because of how the marriage laws in Japan are so embedded culturally in this hierarchical value system where there's men on top and women at the bottom and making kids, marriage law is very much about reproduction in Japan. So that's, for them, is the biggest barrier for same-sex marriage to be accepted in Japan. But there are other ways that they're fighting. For example, Kazu is now representing a case where there's a transgender woman who has been married and has a child, and with Japanese law, you can't change. I need to get this right. It's a very interesting case. Basically, she's already married to a woman. They got married when she was a man. She had a sex change, and she's fighting to have her sex change recognized in her family registration. So if that happens, the same-sex marriage would exist. But at the moment in Japanese law, you can't change your sex in your family registration if you have a child. So they're choosing, so she's fighting that, and that's a way of, achieving same-sex marriage if that goes. But it's also another, it's a real clever move. But we don't know. It's going to take ages anyway. But yeah.
Another question or thought from the audience? Yes, over here.
Firstly, thank you very much. It was such an insight. So I've been to Japan. I've got friends who are Japanese. Last night I was watching Monty Don Goes to Japan, and you're right. We only get to see so much. We don't get to see this great what you've shown us tonight. So thank you. I just wanted to know, is there going to be a part 2? And can I? The guys mentioned the YouTube channel. So the video. Can we follow them on YouTube?
I'm so glad you mentioned their music video because Kazu was like, if anybody asks, he's been wanting me to promote his music forever. And thank you. Yes, I don't think there will be a part 2 because they're so busy getting on with their lives, and I followed them long enough with the camera, and I just want them to be free and enjoy life without us following them around for 2.5 years now. But yes, do check the music video on YouTube. It's called Pictures and Memories, and I believe if you type that in and put Kazupon, which is his YouTube name, I believe it will come up. The full version will come up. It's 6 minutes long.
I think we've got time for one more question, and then we're gonna do a task. So where's the question? Did somebody point over here? No. It's your last chance. Here we go. There we go. This gentleman.
I've observed on a few trips to Japan in the last few years that the approaching Olympics seems to be triggering a lot of change. Do you think that will affect social change as well?
That's a very difficult question. I myself am very ambivalent about the Olympics. I think it takes away the attention from actual issues that we have in Japan and kind of is being used as a promotional tool of making Japan look, glitzy and not really about the social changes, really. And I know that there are more negative effects that come to my attention now about the Olympics and all this chaos that it's creating and resources being put into that and away from actual issues that we already have. So I think it's up to us as filmmakers and as people who are in a position that can create discussions to perhaps gear the discussion towards more issues that are important rather than just a tool for it, for it to be a promotional tool for the government, basically. Yeah.
Okay, Elham, we've got a task. Can you explain what the task is to the audience?
So we'd like to take a group photo for Fumi and Kazu, and as they can't be here, we've got some, they feel like they're here, but we also have some cutouts, which we'd like to accessorize throughout the audience. So, put your hand up if you'd like to hold any different bit of this production. We've got...
Everyone wants a piece of Fumi and Kazu.
We've got quotes, we've got
get some house lights?
We've got
possible to get some house lights?
And at the back. Okay, so as we're getting ready also, we've got some forms that we need to fill in to thank the people who've supported the release.
Right, we've got to do a quick picture because we've only got 2 minutes, so before we have to get out. So okay, everybody smile.
and put your hands up or wave if you've got a picture, but if you don't have a picture.
Don't. Like the brightest that it can go, I'm afraid.
Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Another one. 1, 2, 3. Green noir. Okay, another one. I don't know where Fumi is. Where's Fumi? Who's got Fumi? Oh, there. Oh. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. So very quickly, tell us when the film's in cinemas so people can shout about it.
So the film's in cinemas and it's here for a week from Friday the 1st of March. It's also on VOD, so all the usual like iTunes, Amazon, etc. So please tell people about it and on social media and anyone who might be interested. And thanks so much for coming.
Thank you guys both so much. Good night.